The arrival of the Valkyra. In the far reaches of the Andromeda galaxy, the Valkyra, a proud race of warrior women, ruled with unparalleled strength and an unyielding thirst for conquest. Their empire spanned star systems, their victories leaving civilizations in ruin. But dominance had bred monotony, and the Valkyra grew restless in their supremacy. On board the Solarian, their flagship, Commander Talara, stood before a holographic display of Earth. Her piercing violet eyes studied the blue planet with mild curiosity. "This insignificant rock dares to call itself a civilization," she said, her tone laced with mockery. Beside her, Captain Naira smirked. "Their technology is primitive, their defense is laughable. They barely escaped their atmosphere. They won't even see us coming." Talara nodded, her silver hair glinting under the soft glow of the ship's lights. "Perhaps they'll provide some amusement. A test of their spirit, if nothing else." The Valkyra ship descended toward Earth, cloaked in an impenetrable veil of technology far beyond human understanding. It sliced through the atmosphere silently, revealing itself only as it hovered above New York City. Its enormous shadow blanketed the metropolis, sending shockwaves of fear and confusion through the streets below. Panic erupted. Cars screeched to a halt, and people fled in terror. News helicopters circled the skies, broadcasting the arrival of the alien vessel to a stunned world. Yet amidst the chaos, one man stood rooted in place, his gaze fixed firmly on the ship. David Kane, a retired Special Forces operative turned rescue worker, watched with a mix of awe and calm. His training had prepared him for chaos, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced. He could feel the tension in the air as the ship's hull shimmered in the sunlight, its intricate alien designs pulsating with energy. The Valkyra descended from their ship, their towering figures clad in gleaming silver armor that radiated an aura of invincibility. Talara led them, her presence commanding. Civilians froze at the sight of the alien warriors, their blue skin and glowing eyes otherworldly and terrifying. Talara surveyed the humans with mild disdain. "They scurry like insects," she said, her voice amplified to echo across the streets. "Is this the best your planet has to offer?" Her words sent shivers through the crowd, but David remained unmoved. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, the chaos seemed to pause, the air thick with tension. "You speak as though strength is all that matters," David said, his voice steady. "But strength without understanding is meaningless." Talara raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his defiance. "You think your words hold weight against the might of the Valkyra?" "They hold enough," David replied. "You've come here uninvited. What do you want?" The crowd gasped at his boldness, but Talara only smiled. "Courage is rare among lesser beings," she said. "Perhaps you are worth my time after all." She turned to her warriors and issued a command. "Prepare the arena. Let us see if this human spirit matches his words." As the Valkyra cleared an open space, the crowd backed away, their fear mingling with curiosity. David stood his ground, knowing this was more than a duel, it was a test of Earth's worth in the eyes of their alien visitors. The stage was set, and the world watched as humanity's fate hung in the balance. For David Kane, this was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight to prove that humanity was more than the sum of its flaws. A test of strength. The streets of New York fell silent as the towering alien warriors prepared their makeshift arena. Valkyra soldiers moved with precision, their every motion exuding a disciplined grace. Their presence alone sent waves of unease through the crowd, but David Kane stood firm, his gaze locked on Commander Talara. Talara stepped forward, her silver armor gleaming in the sunlight. She unsheathed a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen, a sleek, pulsating blade of energy that hummed with raw power. Its glow reflected in her violet eyes as she studied David. "You stand alone, Earthman," she said, her voice carrying authority and a hint of amusement. "Do you understand what you face?" David nodded, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I've faced death before. The odds don't scare me." The crowd murmured in disbelief. This was a man with no armor, no advanced technology, and no weapon. Yet, he stood against an alien commander with a confidence that defied logic. Talara's lips curled into a smirk. "Bravery without strength is folly. Let us see if your courage is justified. With a sharp gesture, Talara signaled the start of the duel. The Valkyra soldiers formed a wide circle, their towering forms creating an unyielding barrier between the combatants and the crowd. The humans watched with bated breath as the first strike was about to be delivered. Talara moved like a blur, her energy blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. But David was no stranger to combat. His years of training kicked in, and he sidestepped the attack, the blade slicing mere inches from his torso. The crowd gasped, their fear momentarily giving way to awe. David's counterattack was swift. He lunged forward, delivering a powerful kick to Talara's side. Though his boot connected with her armor, the impact barely made her flinch. She spun gracefully, her blade arcing toward him again. David ducked, feeling the heat of the energy weapon as it passed over his head. Impressive reflexes, Talara said, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. You are more skilled than I anticipated. David didn't respond. His focus was absolute, his mind racing to find a weakness in her form. While Talara's strength and speed were extraordinary, her movements were precise and predictable, a hallmark of someone used to overwhelming her opponents with sheer dominance. The duel intensified. Talara's strikes were relentless, but David's agility and adaptability kept him in the fight. He dodged and countered, his every move calculated to buy time and gauge her limits. The Valkyra soldiers exchanged glances, their expressions betraying a mix of surprise and intrigue. This human was unlike any adversary they had faced before. As the fight progressed, David began to notice a pattern in Talara's attacks. She favored her right side, leaving a slight opening on her left. It was a small weakness, but for someone like David, it was enough. When Talara lunged again, David sidestepped and pivoted, using her momentum against her. He delivered a sharp elbow strike to the gap in her armor at her shoulder. The blow was precise, forcing her to stumble back. A gasp rippled through the crowd as they witnessed the first sign of vulnerability in the seemingly invincible alien commander. Talara straightened, her violet eyes narrowing. For the first time, a hint of respect flickered in her gaze. You are full of surprises, Earthman, she said. But this is far from over. She deactivated her blade and tossed it aside, the weapon clattering to the ground. No weapons, she declared. Let us see if your hands are as strong as your spirit. The crowd roared in astonishment. Even David was caught off guard by the gesture. But he quickly regained his composure and nodded. Fair enough. The duel continued, now a test of pure skill and physicality. Talara's strength was undeniable, but David's adaptability and tactical mind proved to be formidable. He leveraged his smaller size to slip past her defenses, striking at weak points in her armor. Each exchange left the crowd on edge, their fear gradually transforming into hope. Talara, for her part, was no longer fighting to dominate. She was testing, learning, and adapting. As their fists collided, she found herself admiring this human's resilience. He was not the fragile creature she had expected. After a particularly intense exchange, both combatants paused, their breaths labored. The Valkyra soldiers stood in stunned silence, and the humans cheered for their champion. The energy of the moment was palpable, the clash of two worlds encapsulated in a single fight. You've earned my respect, Talara said, her tone sincere. Few have stood against me and lived to tell the tale. David straightened, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. And you've shown me that strength isn't just about brute force. It's about honor. Talara extended her hand, a universal gesture of acknowledgement. David hesitated for a moment, then clasped her hand firmly. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the streets. The duel was over, but the story was just beginning. Talara turned to her soldiers and spoke with authority. This planet is more than we believed. Its people are worthy of consideration. David watched her, knowing that this moment had shifted the balance of power. The Valkyra had come to mock and conquer, but now, they saw humanity in a different light. As the crowd surged forward, celebrating their unexpected hero, David couldn't help but wonder what came next. He had stood against the most powerful being he had ever encountered and survived. But this was only the first step in a journey that would shape the future of Earth and the universe. To be continued in Part 3. The Turning Point. The streets of New York buzzed with excitement and disbelief. The clash between Commander Talera and David Kane had ended, not in defeat or destruction, but in mutual respect. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled to capture the moment, and whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. Humanity had been tested and, against all odds, had held its ground. Talera stood tall, her violet eyes scanning the crowd with newfound interest. The humans, once mere insects in her eyes, now seemed different. Their reactions were raw and unpredictable, a stark contrast to the controlled and disciplined nature of her own people. She turned to David, who was surrounded by curious onlookers. His calm demeanor remained unshaken despite the weight of the moment. "You've shown courage, David Kane," Talera said, her voice carrying a tone of genuine acknowledgement. "It's a quality rare even among my own kind." David met her gaze. "Courage comes from knowing what's worth protecting. Earth is more than you see, more than you understand." Talera nodded slowly, her curiosity piqued. "Then perhaps we have more to learn from your people than we assumed." The Valkyra soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the outcome they had expected. Captain Naira, Talera's second-in-command, stepped forward, her expression hard. "General, this display of respect is unprecedented. We came here to prove our superiority, not to find equals." Talera's gaze snapped to Naira, her tone sharp. "We came to understand, Captain. Superiority without understanding is a hollow victory." Naira clenched her jaw but said nothing further, her rigid posture betraying her disapproval. The rest of the Valkyra remained silent, their disciplined loyalty to their commander overriding any doubts. Meanwhile, Earth's military forces cautiously approached the scene. Tanks and armored vehicles lined the streets, their guns trained on the Valkyra. Helicopters hovered overhead, and soldiers took up defensive positions, unsure whether to engage or stand down. Talera raised her hand, a silent signal to her warriors. "Hold your positions," she commanded. The Valkyra obeyed without hesitation, their weapons remaining holstered. David noticed the tension in the air and stepped forward, placing himself between the two sides. "We don't need more conflict," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This can be the start of something different, something better." A high-ranking military officer stepped out of an armored vehicle, his face a mask of suspicion. "And who are you to negotiate for Earth, Mr. Kane?" David turned to him, his expression unwavering. "I'm just a man who saw an opportunity to stop a fight before it started." "Isn't that what we want?" The officer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Stand down," he ordered into his radio. The soldiers lowered their weapons, though their eyes remained wary. Talera observed the interaction with interest. This human, unarmed and outmatched, had not only stood against her but now seemed to hold sway over his own people. It was a level of influence she hadn't anticipated. "David Kane," she said, her voice softer now. "You speak of your world's potential, yet all we've seen are fragments of your chaos. If you truly believe in what you say, prove it. Show me what makes your people worth understanding." David considered her words carefully. He knew this was more than a challenge, it was an opportunity. "Then come with me," he said. "See Earth through our eyes." The crowd gasped, and even the Valkyra seemed taken aback by the suggestion. Captain Naira stepped forward again, her tone sharp. "General, this is unnecessary. We do not need to lower ourselves to their level." Talera silenced her with a look. "It is not lowering ourselves to seek knowledge, Naira. It is how we grow stronger." Turning back to David, Talera inclined her head slightly. "Very well, David Kane. I will see what your world has to offer. But know this, if your actions fail to match your words, we will not hesitate to end what we started." David nodded, his resolve unshaken. "Then I'll make sure you see the best of us." As the tension began to ease, Talera issued orders to her soldiers. The Valkyra would remain aboard their ship while she accompanied David. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the towering alien warrior followed a lone human into the heart of their city.
The streets of New York, once gripped by fear, now thrummed with a cautious optimism.
Cameras followed every step of the unlikely pair, broadcasting the moment to a global audience.
Humanity was witnessing history, a moment that could change the course of its future. As David and Talara walked side by side, he glanced up at her towering form.
This might be the first time Earth and the Valkyra see eye to eye. Talara raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable.
We shall see, David Kane.
We shall see. To be continued in part 4. Let me know when you're ready for the next part. Bridging Two Worlds.
David Kane led Commander Talara through the bustling streets of New York City. The crowd parted before them, a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity in their eyes.
Cameras followed their every move, broadcasting the surreal scene across the globe.
Talara, towering over the humans around her, moved with a confidence that made her seem untouchable. Yet, her violet eyes flicked around with genuine interest, taking in the sights and sounds of Earth's most iconic city. This world is chaotic, Talara remarked, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity.
Your people seem to thrive in disorder. David smiled faintly. That's one way to look at it.
But what you call disorder, we call diversity. Each person here has their own story, their own role to play.
It's what makes us strong.
Talara tilted her head slightly, intrigued.
Strength through individuality? An odd concept.
The Valkyra value unity and discipline above all else. They walked past a street vendor selling hot dogs. The aroma wafted through the air, and Talara paused, her sharp senses detecting something unfamiliar.
What is that smell?
David chuckled.
Street food.
Something simple, but it's a part of our culture.
Want to try? Talara hesitated, her pride as a warrior conflicting with her curiosity. Finally, she nodded. David bought 2 hot dogs, handing one to her. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the alien commander examined the humble snack.
She took a tentative bite, her expression remaining stoic. After a moment, she nodded.
Surprisingly satisfying. David smirked. Welcome to Earth.
As they continued their walk, they came across a park where children were playing.
Talara stopped, watching as the kids chased each other, their laughter echoing through the open space.
A small girl, no older than 5, approached her, holding a flower in her tiny hand.
Talara crouched down, her imposing figure suddenly seeming less intimidating.
The girl extended the flower to her, and Talara accepted it with a rare softness in her expression.
What is this? She asked.
It's a flower, the girl said shyly.
For you.
David stepped closer, smiling.
It's a gesture of kindness. A way of saying, welcome. Talara looked at the flower, then at the girl.
Kindness, she repeated, as if the concept were foreign to her.
She glanced at David. This is what you value? Simple acts of compassion? It's part of what makes us human, David replied.
Our strength isn't just in our technology or our will to fight. It's in how we connect with each other, even in the smallest ways. Talara stood, her gaze thoughtful as she looked at the bustling city around her.
Perhaps there is more to your people than I gave credit for. But not all acts are kind.
Your species has a history of war and destruction.
David nodded solemnly. We're not perfect. We've made mistakes, big ones. But we learn, we adapt, and we strive to be better. That's what makes us human.
Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion nearby. A group of protesters had gathered, holding signs that read "No to aliens" and "Protect Earth."
Their shouts grew louder as Talara and David approached.
Go back where you came from, one man yelled. We don't need more threats.
David raised a hand, trying to calm the crowd. They're not here to harm us. They're here to understand. The man scoffed. How do we know that? They could wipe us out in a second. Talara stepped forward, her imposing figure silencing the crowd.
You are right, she said, her voice commanding but not unkind.
We could. But we did not come here to destroy.
We came to observe, to learn.
It is not weakness to seek understanding, it is strength.
Her words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. The protesters murmured among themselves, their anger giving way to uncertainty. David watched, impressed by her ability to command not just her own people, but his as well. The tension eased, and the crowd began to disperse.
Talara turned to David. Your people's fear is understandable.
Fear often blinds reason.
David nodded. It's something we're working on. Trust takes time.
As the day went on, Talara continued to observe humanity in all its complexity. She saw the struggles of the homeless on the streets, the innovation of engineers working in labs, and the resilience of first responders rushing to emergencies. Each encounter added layers to her understanding of this chaotic, fascinating species.
By evening, they stood on a rooftop overlooking the city.
The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the skyline in shades of orange and gold. Talara looked out at the sprawling metropolis, her expression unreadable.
Your world is complicated, she said finally. There is beauty in its chaos, strength in its flaws. David smiled. That's humanity in a nutshell. We're a work in progress.
Talara turned to him, a rare softness in her gaze.
Perhaps we are not so different, David Kane. The Valkyra strive for perfection, but perhaps it is in imperfection that true strength lies. David met her gaze. Maybe there's something we can learn from each other.
As the city lights began to twinkle below, Talara extended her hand.
This is only the beginning.
David shook her hand firmly.
Let's make it count.
Far above, aboard the Valkyra ship, Captain Naira watched the scene unfold through a holographic display.
Her expression was one of discontent. This alliance will weaken us, she muttered under her breath. We are warriors, not diplomats.
But in her heart, she knew Talara was not one to make decisions lightly.
The question was, how far would the Valkyra go to embrace this new path? To be continued in Part 5. Let me know when you're ready for Part 5. The Seeds of Alliance.
As night blanketed New York City, David Kane and Commander Talara returned to the Valkyra's flagship, Solarian, to begin the next phase of their exchange. The towering vessel, now a symbol of both tension and hope, loomed above the skyline, its alien design a stark contrast to Earth's structures below. Inside the ship, a sense of unease rippled among the Valkyra warriors.
Diplomacy was not their way, and many questioned their commander's motives.
Captain Naira stood stiffly in the control room, her violet eyes watching Talara's every move.
General, I must protest. This alliance will only weaken us.
These humans are unpredictable and undisciplined. Talara turned to her second-in-command, her tone sharp.
And yet, they possess a resilience we cannot ignore. Their imperfections may be their greatest strength. Do not mistake adaptability for weakness, Captain. Naira clenched her fists but said nothing, bowing her head in reluctant deference.
Talara then turned to David, who stood among her soldiers, a stark contrast in his plain clothes and human fragility. Despite the skepticism around him, David's calm confidence radiated through the room. This exchange is not one-sided, Talara said, addressing both her crew and David. We have come to understand humanity, but you, David Kane, must also see the Valkyra for who we are.
Only then can this alliance hold any meaning. David nodded. Then show me. Let me see what makes the Valkyra the warriors you claim to be. Talara motioned for him to follow, and the two walked down a series of metallic corridors that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. The ship's interior was both elegant and intimidating, its sleek design reflecting the Valkyra's disciplined nature. They entered a vast training chamber where Valkyra warriors sparred with precision and intensity. The room was filled with the hum of energy weapons, the clash of armor, and the sharp commands of instructors. David observed silently, his eyes darting between the warriors. Their movements were almost mechanical in their perfection, fluid, calculated, and devoid of hesitation. Talara gestured toward the scene. This is the core of who we are. Every Valkyra is trained from childhood to be a warrior. Strength, discipline, and unity define us. It is why we have conquered countless worlds. David crossed his arms, studying the warriors. It's impressive, no doubt. But it also feels rigid. Where's the individuality? The creativity? Talara frowned slightly. Creativity has no place in battle. It invites chaos. David smiled faintly. Or opportunity. Rigidity can break under pressure. Creativity can adapt. Talara regarded him for a long moment, her mind churning over his words. Before she could respond, a young Valkyra warrior stepped forward, her curiosity evident. "General," she said, her voice hesitant, "may I ask this human a question?" Talara nodded, her expression softening. "Go ahead, Lyra." The young warrior turned to David. "How did you stand against the general?" "She is the strongest among us." David chuckled lightly. "I didn't try to match her strength. I used what I had: speed, observation, and a bit of stubbornness. Strength isn't just about muscle. It's about finding your advantage." Lyra tilted her head, intrigued. "Advantage? We are not taught this." David glanced at Talara. "Maybe you should be." Talara's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Perhaps there is merit in your approach, David Kane. But do not mistake flexibility for a lack of resolve. The Valkyra do not bend easily." David nodded. "And maybe that's why this alliance could work. You bring discipline and strength, we bring adaptability and innovation. Together, we might achieve something neither of us could alone." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp alarm. The training chamber fell silent as lights dimmed and a red glow filled the room. Talara's expression hardened as a voice echoed through the ship's intercom. "General, we have detected an unidentified vessel approaching Earth's atmosphere. It does not match any known human or Valkyra design." Talara's eyes narrowed. "Prepare the ship for defense. David Kane, you should return to the surface." David shook his head. "Not a chance. If this involves Earth, I'm staying." Talara hesitated but saw the determination in his eyes. "Very well. Stay close." They rushed to the command deck, where a holographic display showed a massive ship entering Earth's orbit. Its design was angular and menacing, with a dark metallic sheen that seemed to absorb light. The crew worked frantically to analyze the intruder. "Do we know who they are?" Talara demanded. One of the officers replied, "Negative, General. Their technology is advanced, but their origin is unknown. They're hailing us." Talara straightened. On screen, the holographic display shifted to show the face of an alien being, its features sharp and reptilian, with scales that shimmered in shades of green and gold. Its eyes glowed a piercing yellow, filled with malice. "I am Zrylok of the Korthan Dominion," the alien said, its voice a low growl. "Earth is now under our protection. Leave, Valkyra, or face annihilation." Talara's jaw tightened. "The Valkyra do not take orders, least of all from scavengers like you." Zrylok's lips curled into a sinister grin. "Then you have chosen war." The transmission ended abruptly, and the Korthan ship began powering its weapons. Alarms blared throughout the Solarian, and Talara turned to her crew. "Raise shields and prepare to engage. Do not fire unless provoked." David stepped forward. "The Korthans, what do they want with Earth?" Talara's voice was grim. "The Korthans are conquerors like us, but they do not seek understanding or alliances. They consume, destroy, and leave nothing behind." David clenched his fists. "Then we can't let them take Earth." Talara nodded. "Agreed. But this is not just your fight, David Kane. This is ours now, too." As the Solarian moved into position, Earth's military forces scrambled to respond. Jets streaked across the sky, and missile systems were armed, though they stood little chance against the advanced technology of the alien ships. For the first time, humanity and the Valkyra found themselves united against a common enemy. The tension of earlier days was replaced by a fragile but growing sense of trust. Together, they would face the storm.